The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly beneath the blazing summer sun, a land where survival depended on grit more than luck. Dust swirled across the empty roads, coating wagon wheels and boots alike, while jagged mountains stood silent against a cloudless sky. It was a place where fortunes were made and lives were lost, where strangers arrived seeking hope and often found hardship instead. More than 2,000 miles away, in the quiet town of St. Louis, Missouri, 28-year-old Clara Whitmore stood alone beside the window of her tiny boarding house room. She watched the rain slide down the glass, blurring the busy streets below. Once, she had dreamed of a comfortable home filled with laughter and children. Instead, she had been left with debts, loneliness, and memories she wished she could erase. 3 years earlier, Clara had buried her husband, Thomas. To the outside world, he had been a respectable businessman. Inside their home, however, he had been controlling, cruel, and unpredictable. He had ruled through fear, convincing Clara that silence was the only path to survival. Even after his death from illness, the scars of that marriage remained. Loud voices made her flinch. Sudden movements caused her heart to race. She trusted no one. Teaching at the local school had barely kept food on the table. Her wages disappeared into rent, medicine for her aging aunt during her final months, and the debts Thomas had secretly accumulated before he died. When her aunt passed away that spring, Clara found herself completely alone. Creditors began appearing at her door with increasing frequency. Each visit carried the same warning. "You have 30 days. Those words echoed in her mind every night. One afternoon, while organizing donated books at the church, Clara noticed a folded newspaper tucked between two hymnals. Across one page appeared a column she had never paid attention to before. Mail-order matrimonials. Respectable gentlemen seeking honorable wives for settlement in the Western Territories. Transportation provided. Honest intentions only. Normally, she would have dismissed such advertisements as desperate fantasies. Yet desperation had become the defining fact of her own life. One listing caught her eye. Widowed ranch owner seeks educated Christian woman to build a peaceful home in Arizona Territory. Financial security assured. The promise of security felt almost unreal. Clara read the advertisement again and again until the paper nearly tore beneath her fingers. That evening she prayed longer than she had in months. "I don't know if this is the right path," she whispered into the darkness. "But I don't have another." Over the following weeks, Clara exchanged letters with the man identified only as Mr. K. The handwriting was simple and careful, though someone else seemed to have written portions of the letters more fluently. He described fertile land, horses, fruit trees, and a quiet life away from crowded cities. He spoke little about himself, except to say he valued honesty, hard work, and family. There was one detail the letters never made completely clear. Clara assumed Mr. K was a white rancher living near one of the western settlements. She never thought to ask otherwise. When the final letter arrived, it included a train ticket west and a short message. "If you still choose this path, I will meet you when you arrive." Her belongings fit into a single worn suitcase. On the morning of her departure, Clara locked the door to her boarding room for the last time. She handed the key to the landlord without looking back. The train journey lasted nearly a week. The farther west they traveled, the more the landscape changed. Thick forests gave way to open plains. Rivers became narrow streams. Finally, towering red cliffs and endless deserts replaced everything familiar. Passengers spoke excitedly about opportunity, silver mines, cattle, and new beginnings. Clara remained quiet. Each mile carried her farther from the life she had known and closer to a future she could not imagine. When the train finally reached the small Arizona station, only a handful of people stepped onto the wooden platform. Cowboys shouted while loading supplies. Soldiers stood talking beside their horses. Families embraced relatives they had not seen for months. Clara searched the crowd for an older rancher wearing work clothes and perhaps a gray beard. Instead, she noticed a tall Native American man standing several yards away. His long dark hair was tied neatly behind his shoulders. He wore a clean buckskin shirt beneath a dark jacket, and his posture was calm and confident. Beside him stood a younger man who smiled politely. The younger man approached first. "Miss Whitmore?" Clara nodded cautiously. "My name is Daniel. I translate for my friend when needed." He gestured toward the taller man. "This is Kai." Clara smiled politely, assuming Kai worked for the ranch owner. "It's a pleasure," she said. "Is Mr. K nearby?" Daniel hesitated. "Kai, is Mr. K?" The word struck Clara like a sudden winter wind. She looked from Daniel to Kai, searching their faces for some sign that this was a misunderstanding. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. Daniel shook his head gently. "There is no mistake." Kai stepped forward slowly, making sure not to appear threatening. Though he spoke English with a noticeable accent, his words were clear. "I am grateful, you came." Clara's hands tightened around the handle of her suitcase. Her heart pounded. Everything she had imagined during the long journey dissolved in an instant. The letters had never lied, yet they had never revealed the truth she had assumed. Standing before her was not the rancher she had pictured but an Apache scout respected by both his own people and nearby settlers. Fear rose inside her, not because of Kai himself, but because the future had suddenly become even more uncertain. Kai noticed the fear in her eyes. He did not move closer. He did not reach for her suitcase. He simply waited. After a long silence, Clara forced herself to speak. "I need you to understand something." Kai nodded once. Her voice trembled. "I agreed to come because I needed a new life. But, don't touch me." The words hung heavily between them. Daniel looked uncertain, but Kai's expression remained calm. After a quiet moment, he placed his hand over his own heart in a gesture of respect. "I hear you," he said softly. Without another word, he stepped back, leaving several feet between them. It was a small act, almost invisible to everyone else on the platform. But it was the first promise he intended to keep. The wagon rolled slowly across the dusty trail, its wooden wheels creaking with every turn. Clara sat stiffly on the narrow bench, clutching her suitcase as though it were the only familiar thing left in the world. Kai guided the horses with quiet confidence, his attention fixed on the winding path ahead. Daniel rode beside them for the first few miles, translating whenever conversation faltered, but long stretches of silence settled comfortably over the journey. For Clara, however, the silence was anything but comfortable. She stole cautious glances at Kai, trying to reconcile the man before her with the frightening stories she had heard growing up. Newspapers had painted the Apache as fierce warriors. Travelers spoke of raids and conflict. Yet the man sitting only a few feet away showed none of the anger or menace she had imagined. He drove the wagon patiently, stopping twice to let the horses drink from a narrow stream and once more to offer Clara fresh water without stepping too close. Each time, he placed the canteen on the wagon seat between them and waited for her to pick it up herself. He remembered. "Don't touch me." Not once had he forgotten those words. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Daniel pointed toward a cluster of cottonwood trees in the distance. "We're almost there." Nestled beneath the trees stood several sturdy wooden buildings, a fenced pasture filled with horses, and a broad garden bursting with late summer vegetables. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney of the largest cabin. It was far different from the lonely wilderness Clara had expected. Children laughed somewhere beyond the trees. Women sorted corn beneath a shaded shelter. A pair of elderly men repaired saddles while exchanging quiet jokes in Apache. The settlement was alive. As the wagon entered the clearing, conversation slowed. Curious eyes turned toward Clara. Some smiled politely. Others simply watched. Clara lowered her gaze. She knew she looked just as out of place to them as they did to her. An older woman approached, her silver-streaked hair braided neatly down her back. Her face carried deep lines that spoke of years spent beneath the desert sun, yet her dark eyes were warm. Daniel smiled. "This is Ayana," he explained. "She is Kai's aunt." Ayana greeted Clara with a gentle nod before speaking softly in Apache. Daniel translated. "She says, 'Welcome to your new home.'" Clara managed a quiet, "Thank you." Ayana reached toward Clara's shoulder, then noticed the younger woman's body tense immediately. Instead of touching her, she withdrew her hand and simply smiled. Even without understanding English, she had recognized fear. That small gesture eased something inside Clara. Perhaps they truly intended to respect her wishes. Kai carried only his own saddlebag toward the cabin. Clara expected him to take her suitcase as any husband might, but he left it exactly where she had placed it. "You carry?" he asked. She nodded. "I'll manage." He simply inclined his head. The cabin surprised her. It was clean, spacious, and carefully maintained. Handmade blankets covered the beds. Shelves displayed neatly arranged pottery and books. Sunlight streamed through wide windows overlooking the valley. Nothing about the home felt temporary. Nothing suggested the rough frontier life she had imagined. Kai pointed toward a small room near the back. "Your room." Clara blinked. "My room?" He nodded. "You asked for space." She hesitated before opening the door. Inside stood a simple bed covered with a colorful woven blanket, a wooden dresser, a wash basin, and fresh wildflowers resting in a clay vase. Someone had prepared the room long before she arrived. Tears unexpectedly filled Clara's eyes. She had expected demands. Instead, she had been given privacy. That evening the community gathered for supper beneath the open sky. Long wooden tables overflowed with roasted meat, beans, squash, fresh bread, and fruit harvested from nearby orchards. Children darted between the adults, laughing without restraint. Clara sat quietly near the end of one table while Daniel translated conversations around her. Many people asked about Missouri. Others wanted to know whether snow truly covered the streets during winter. One elderly man proudly showed her a hand-carved flute. A young girl offered Clara a small bouquet of desert flowers before running away, giggling. Little by little, Clara's fear gave way to curiosity. Not everyone welcomed her, however. Across the fire, a man named Taza watched silently. Finally, he spoke sharply in Apache. Daniel's smile faded. Clara looked between them. What did he say? Daniel hesitated. He wonders why Kai brought a white woman here, after everything that has happened between our people and the settlers. The word stung. Kai answered calmly in Apache, never raising his voice. Taza responded with another heated remark before walking away into the darkness. What did Kai say? Clara asked quietly. Daniel looked at Kai before translating. He said. She came seeking peace. Until she gives us reason otherwise, she deserves it. Clara lowered her eyes. No one had defended her like that in years. Later that night, she stepped outside the cabin, unable to sleep. The desert sky stretched endlessly overhead, filled with more stars than she had ever seen. Kai sat several yards away near a small fire, repairing a leather bridle. He noticed her but made no effort to approach. After several minutes, Clara finally spoke. You've kept your promise. Kai looked up. I said. I would. She nodded slowly. I expected this marriage to be different. So did I, he admitted with the faintest hint of a smile. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Clara felt the edges of her fear soften. She still did not trust easily. She still carried wounds no one could see. But as the fire crackled beneath the vast Arizona sky, she began to wonder if this strange new place, and the quiet man who had welcomed her without asking for anything in return, might offer something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. 3 weeks passed, and the rhythm of life in the Apache settlement slowly became familiar to Clara. Each morning began with the golden light spilling over the desert hills. Women gathered water from the nearby stream, children chased one another between the cottonwood trees, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from outdoor ovens. Clara found comfort in routine. She helped Ayanna prepare meals, taught several children how to read simple English words, and tended a small patch of herbs beside the cabin. Though she still kept her distance from Kai, she could no longer deny the quiet respect growing between them. He never entered her room without permission. He never stood too close. Whenever they walked together through the settlement, he always left enough space between them that she never felt trapped. Sometimes they shared supper in silence, listening to the evening breeze instead of forcing conversation. It was an unusual kind of companionship, but it was real. One afternoon, Kai invited Clara to ride with him into the nearest trading town. "We need flour," he said. "And medicine for Ayanna." Clara hesitated. She had not left the settlement since arriving. Finally, she nodded. "I'll come." The trip was peaceful at first. The wagon rolled through winding desert trails lined with towering saguaro cacti. Hawks circled overhead while jackrabbits darted across the sand. Kai occasionally pointed toward distant landmarks, speaking their Apache names before explaining the English meanings. For the first time, Clara found herself smiling. The town bustled with ranchers, merchants, soldiers, and travelers. Some greeted Kai with respect, while others stared with suspicion. Clara noticed the difference immediately. At the general store, the owner welcomed Kai warmly. "You've been gone a while," the old merchant said. Kai smiled politely. "My wife wished to see the town." The word wife caught Clara off guard. It sounded strange, yet Kai spoke it without claiming ownership. It was simply the truth of their arrangement. After purchasing supplies, they began the journey home as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The desert grew quiet. Too quiet. Kai's expression changed. He slowed the horses and scanned the surrounding hills. Clara noticed. "What is it?" He listened carefully before answering. "Horses. I don't hear anything." "You will." Seconds later, the faint thunder of hooves echoed across the canyon. 3 masked riders appeared atop a ridge. Bandits. Without warning, a rifle cracked through the evening air. The horses panicked. Another bullet shattered the wagon's lantern. "Get down!" Kai shouted. Clara froze. The years of fear she thought she had buried rushed back all at once. Her mind refused to move even as danger closed around them. The outlaws raced downhill, shouting for them to stop. Kai snapped the reins, urging the frightened horses forward, but the narrow trail curved toward a rocky cliff. One more shot struck the wagon, splintering the wooden side. "Clara!" Kai yelled. She stared helplessly at the approaching riders. Another gunshot rang out. The horses reared violently. Clara lost her balance. She slipped from the wagon seat. For one terrifying moment, she dangled over the edge, her fingers barely clinging to the rough wood as the wagon bounced across the uneven ground. Below her, sharp rocks waited only a few feet away. Everything happened in an instant. Kai dropped the reins. Without hesitation, he lunged toward her. His strong hand seized her wrist. "No!" Clara screamed instinctively. The word escaped before she even realized it. "Don't touch me." But Kai didn't let go. With all his strength, he pulled her back onto the wagon just as another bullet struck the place where she had been hanging. A heartbeat later, the wagon crashed through a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders. The bandits' horses could not follow. Their curses echoed through the canyon as Kai drove deeper into the rocky pass until the gunfire finally faded into silence. Only then did he stop. The horses trembled. Dust settled around them. Neither spoke. Clara sat curled against the opposite side of the wagon, breathing hard. Kai remained where he was, his chest rising and falling from exhaustion. Finally, he spoke in a quiet voice. "They are gone." Clara looked down at her wrist. His handprint still seemed to burn against her skin. She knew he had saved her life. She knew she would have fallen onto the rocks without him. Yet all she could feel was panic. Memories she had fought for years came flooding back. Thomas grabbing her arm. Doors slamming shut. His angry voice filling the house. The helplessness. The fear. Tears blurred her vision. "I told you," she whispered. "I told you not to touch me." Kai's face filled with sorrow. "I know. You promised." "I did." "Then why?" He looked toward the canyon where the bandits had disappeared before answering. "Because if I had listened." His voice broke for the first time since she had known him. "You would be dead." Silence settled between them. Clara wanted to thank him. She wanted to tell him she understood. Instead, her body betrayed her. She shrank farther away, wrapping her arms around herself as though building an invisible wall. Kai saw it happen. Without another word, he climbed down from the wagon. He walked several yards away and sat alone beneath a mesquite tree, giving her all the space she needed. The rest of the journey home passed in complete silence. When they reached the settlement after dark, Ayana hurried outside, relieved to see them alive. "What happened?" Kai answered briefly. "Bandits." He carried the supplies inside but left Clara's suitcase and shawl untouched, waiting for her to gather them herself. Clara thanked Ayana quietly before disappearing into her room. She closed the door. Then she locked it. Outside, Kai sat alone beside the dying fire. He replayed the moment again and again. He had broken the one promise that mattered most to her. Even though he knew he would make the same choice again to save her life, he also knew something fragile between them had shattered. Inside her room, Clara pressed her forehead against the window as tears streamed down her face. She wasn't crying because Kai had hurt her. She was crying because he hadn't. For the first time, she realized that the man who had crossed her boundary had done so not to control her, but to keep her alive. Her heart understood the difference. Her wounds did not. The morning after the attack felt unusually quiet. Normally, the settlement awakened with cheerful voices, clattering pots, and children racing through the open fields. But Clara noticed every sound seemed distant, as though she were hearing the world through a closed door. She remained inside her room long after sunrise, unable to bring herself to face anyone. The memories from the canyon refused to leave her. Each time she closed her eyes, she felt Kai's hand gripping her wrist, pulling her to safety. Yet in the next instant, the memory twisted into another, Thomas's rough hands dragging her across the floor years ago. Her mind knew they were different. Her heart could not separate them. Outside, Kai continued with his daily work as though nothing had changed. He repaired fences damaged by a recent storm, checked on the horses, and helped the younger men prepare for a hunting trip. He never once walked toward Clara's room. He knew she needed space. And he intended to give it to her. Several people in the settlement noticed the distance growing between them. Taza, who had doubted Clara from the beginning, crossed his arms as he watched Kai work. "You saved her," he said in Apache. "Yet she looks at you as if you were the enemy." Kai continued repairing the fence without lifting his eyes. Fear does not always know the truth. Taza frowned. "You owe her nothing." Kai finally looked up. "I gave my word. But you broke it." "I broke it to keep her alive." Taza shook his head, unable to understand, and walked away. Later that afternoon, Ayana knocked softly on Clara's bedroom door. "May I come in?" After a long pause, Clara unlocked the door. The older woman entered carrying 2 cups of herbal tea. She sat quietly beside the window without asking questions. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Clara whispered, "He kept every promise until yesterday." Ayanna nodded gently. "He feels he failed you." Clara stared into her tea. "I know he saved my life." "Then why does your heart still hurt?" Tears gathered in Clara's eyes. "Because I don't know how to stop being afraid." Ayanna reached into a small leather pouch tied at her waist and removed a smooth river stone, worn soft by years of flowing water. "When I was a young girl," she began, "our people crossed a river after heavy rains. The current was stronger than anyone expected. My younger brother slipped beneath the water. She turned the stone over in her weathered hands. My father jumped in after him. To save his life, he grabbed him so tightly that his arms were covered in bruises for weeks." Clara listened silently. "My brother cried because he remembered the pain of being held." Ayanna smiled softly. "But as he grew older, he learned something important." She placed the stone into Clara's hand. "There is a difference between the hand that harms, and the hand that refuses to let you drown." Clara looked down at the stone resting in her palm. Its surface was cool and perfectly smooth. She closed her fingers around it. That evening, Clara wandered beyond the gardens to a quiet hill overlooking the valley. She found Kai sitting beneath an old cottonwood tree, sharpening a hunting knife. When he noticed her approaching, he immediately set the knife aside and remained seated, making no move toward her. "You don't have to leave," Clara said quietly. "I wasn't." She stopped several feet away. The familiar distance remained between them. "I've been trying to understand something." Kai waited. "When you grabbed my arm," she said, "did you even think about what I had asked?" He answered honestly. "No." Her eyes lowered. "I thought only this." He picked up a dry branch and drew 2 lines in the dirt. "One path. Then another. Or the other." He looked at her. "If I let you fall, I keep my promise." His voice was calm but heavy. "If I touch you, I break it." He erased the first line with his boot. There was no time for a third choice. Clara felt tears sting her eyes again. "I've been angry with you." "I know. But I think—" She struggled to find the words. "I think I've really been angry with my past." Kai said nothing. He knew some battles could not be fought with advice. "They say time heals everything," Clara whispered. A faint smile touched Kai's face. "In my experience." He looked toward the fading sunset. "Time heals nothing." She looked up. "It only gives us enough days to learn how to carry the pain." His words settled deep inside her. For years, Clara had waited for her fear to disappear. Perhaps that day would never come. Perhaps healing wasn't forgetting. Perhaps it was choosing not to let yesterday decide tomorrow. The following morning, Clara surprised everyone. She joined the children beneath the cottonwood trees and resumed teaching them their lessons. Her smile was still cautious, but it was genuine. Kai watched from a distance. He did not interrupt. He did not approach. He simply smiled to himself before returning to work. The wall between them had not disappeared. But somewhere within its weathered stones, the first small crack had finally appeared. Neither of them knew how long true healing would take. Neither knew what trials still lay ahead. But for the first time since the night in the canyon, hope no longer felt impossible. It felt fragile. And sometimes, fragile things were worth protecting most of all. Autumn arrived quietly in the Arizona territory. The scorching heat of summer gave way to cool mornings, and a golden light settled over the valley. Cottonwood leaves fluttered in the breeze like pieces of burnished gold, while the settlement prepared for the coming winter. Clara had now lived among the Apache for nearly 4 months. Life was no longer as unfamiliar as it had once been. She could greet the elders in Apache, help prepare traditional meals, and even laugh with the children as they practiced reading from the weathered books she had brought from Missouri. The distance between her and Kai still remained, but it had changed. It was no longer built from fear alone. It was built from patience. Some evenings they sat on opposite sides of the fire, talking quietly about their childhoods. Kai told her about learning to track deer with his father before he was 10 years old. Clara shared stories of growing up beside the Mississippi River, where she had dreamed of becoming a teacher long before she ever imagined becoming a wife. They never spoke about the canyon. Neither needed to. The memory lingered between them, but it no longer defined every conversation. One crisp morning, Kai prepared his horse before sunrise. "I'll be back before nightfall," he told Clara. "Where are you going?" "To meet an army officer at Fort Mason." She looked surprised. "I thought you didn't trust the soldiers." "I trust a few." He smiled faintly. "They need someone who knows the mountain trails." Before leaving, he paused. "If I'm late, don't worry." Clara nodded. "I'll keep supper warm." It was such a simple exchange that neither of them realized how much had changed. Months earlier, she could hardly bear to speak to him. Now she was waiting for him to come home. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Kai had still not returned. The stew simmered untouched over the fire. The children finished their evening meal. Families drifted into their cabins. Clara stood outside long after darkness settled across the valley. Something felt wrong. Near midnight, the sound of galloping horses shattered the silence. 3 soldiers rode into the settlement. Their commander dismounted stiffly. "Which of you knows a man called Kai?" Clara stepped forward. "I do." The officer removed his hat. "He has been arrested." The word struck her like a blow. "For what?" "He was found near the site of an attack on a military supply wagon. 2 soldiers are dead." Clara stared in disbelief. "That's impossible." "He claims he tried to stop the attackers." The officer sighed. "But witnesses say they saw an Apache warrior fleeing the scene." "That doesn't mean it was Kai. He'll stand before a military tribunal in 3 days." The soldiers turned their horses and rode away, leaving behind a stunned silence. The settlement erupted into angry conversation. Taza slammed his fist against a fence post. "This is why we never trusted them." Several younger warriors immediately began gathering weapons. "We'll bring him back ourselves." Kai's aunt stepped between them. "And start a war." The men fell silent. Everyone looked toward Clara. She stood motionless, replaying every moment she had spent with Kai. The man she knew would never murder innocent people. Not for revenge. Not for pride. Not for anything. The next morning, Clara made her decision. "I'm going to the fort." Ayana frowned. "The soldiers may not listen." "They have to." Taza shook his head. "They won't believe a white woman who lives among Apache." Clara met his eyes. "Then I'll make them." Daniel offered to accompany her, but Clara refused. "This is something I must do myself." She borrowed one of the settlement's fastest horses and began the long ride to Fort Mason. The journey took nearly an entire day. Dust coated her dress. Her hands blistered from the reins. Still, she refused to stop. When she finally reached the military fort, 2 guards blocked the entrance. "No visitors. I need to see whoever is in charge. The commander's busy." "It's about Kai." One guard laughed. "The Apache prisoner? He saved my life." The laughter disappeared. Moments later, Clara found herself standing before Colonel James Whitaker, a stern man with silver hair and tired eyes. He listened patiently as she explained everything: the mail-order marriage, the attack by the bandits, Kai's kindness, and the man she had come to know over the past 4 months. When she finished, the colonel folded his hands. "Mrs. Whitmore." "It's Clara." "Very well." He leaned back thoughtfully. You've spoken highly of your husband. She smiled sadly. I haven't always. What changed? Clara looked out the window toward the dusty parade grounds. I spent years believing every hand that reached for me meant harm. She swallowed hard. Kai was the first man who proved me wrong. The colonel remained silent. He had every opportunity to demand my trust. He never did. He waited. And when he finally broke his promise. Her voice trembled. It was only to save my life. The room fell completely still. Just then, another officer hurried inside carrying a leather satchel. Colonel. What is it? We found one of the surviving teamsters. The man caught his breath. He identified the attackers. Were they Apache? No, sir. He shook his head firmly. The attack was carried out by the Red Canyon Gang. The colonel immediately stood. And Kai? The witness says the Apache scout fought the bandits while trying to protect our men. For a long moment, no one spoke. The colonel removed his spectacles. It appears we've arrested the wrong man. An hour later, the heavy iron door of the military jail swung open. Kai stepped into the sunlight. His wrists still bore the marks of shackles. The first person he saw waiting outside was Clara. She had ridden across the desert for him. For several seconds, they simply looked at one another. You came, Kai said softly. Clara nodded. I told them the truth. You didn't have to. Yes. She smiled through tears. I did. Without thinking, she closed the distance between them. Then she stopped. Only a single step remained between them. For a brief moment, both remembered the promise she had made months ago at the train station. Clara looked into his eyes. This time, the choice was hers. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out. Her trembling hand found his. Kai didn't move. He allowed her to decide. When her fingers gently wrapped around his, neither of them spoke. No grand declaration was needed. The woman who had once whispered, "Don't touch me," had taken the first step herself. The scars of her past had not disappeared. They never would. But they no longer held the power to keep her heart locked away. And in that quiet moment beneath the Arizona sky, both Clara and Kai understood that the strongest acts of love are often the gentlest, waiting, trusting, and allowing another person to choose when they are finally ready. Winter arrived gently in the Arizona territory. Unlike the harsh snowstorms Clara remembered from Missouri, winter in Arizona was quiet. The mornings were crisp, a thin layer of frost sometimes covering the grass before the warm sun melted it away. The cottonwood trees stood bare, and smoke curled from the chimneys of the settlement as families gathered around evening fires. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm once again. Kai returned to his work as a scout and guide, helping travelers safely cross dangerous mountain trails and serving as a trusted messenger between nearby settlements and his own people. His honesty during the incident with the Red Canyon Gang had earned the respect of Colonel Whitaker, who made certain the truth was shared with neighboring forts. Suspicion did not disappear overnight. But slowly, people began to see Kai for the man he truly was. Clara, meanwhile, reopened a small school beneath the large cottonwood tree near the center of the settlement. At first, only a handful of Apache children attended. Soon, children from nearby ranches began arriving as well. Every morning, voices speaking both English and Apache filled the air. The children laughed together long before their parents learned to do the same. One afternoon, Clara watched a little Apache girl helping the son of a white rancher sound out difficult English words. The two children didn't seem to notice that the adults around them often divided themselves by race or history. To them, they were simply friends. Clara smiled. Perhaps the next generation would build bridges where the last had built walls. Months passed. The distance between Clara and Kai had disappeared so gradually that neither could remember exactly when it happened. One evening, after finishing supper, they walked together to the hill overlooking the valley. It had become their favorite place, a quiet spot where they could watch the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Kai sat on a smooth rock while Clara stood beside him, gazing across the endless landscape. "Do you remember the train station?" she asked. Kai smiled faintly. "You looked ready to board the next train home." She laughed. "I almost did." "I know." She grew thoughtful. "I was terrified." "I know that too." She looked down at her hands. "I've wanted to tell you something for a long time." Kai waited patiently. "When I said, 'Don't touch me,'" her voice softened. "I wasn't really talking to you." He looked at her. "I was talking to every memory I carried with me." The evening breeze stirred the dry grass around them. "I thought if no one ever touched me again." She paused. "Then no one could ever hurt me again." Kai nodded slowly. That made sense. She turned toward him, surprised. "You don't think I was foolish?" "No." He shook his head. "I think you survived." Tears filled her eyes. For years, she had blamed herself for living in fear. Hearing those simple words lifted a burden she had carried for far too long. She reached for his hand. This time, there was no hesitation. No fear. Only peace. "I don't think my heart will ever be the way it was before," she admitted. Kai gently squeezed her hand. "Neither will mine." She looked at him in surprise. "I've lost family." He gazed toward the distant mountains. "I've seen war. I've buried friends." His voice remained calm, but she could hear the sorrow beneath it. "Some wounds never disappear." He smiled gently. "But they don't have to decide who we become." For a long while, they simply watched the sun disappear beyond the horizon. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt like home. 5 years later. The settlement had grown into a thriving community where Apache families and neighboring ranchers traded goods, celebrated harvest festivals, and worked together during difficult seasons. The little school beneath the cottonwood tree had become a proper one-room schoolhouse, built by volunteers from both communities. Its front window overlooked the same valley where Clara had once arrived filled with fear. Inside, shelves overflowed with books in both English and Apache. Children learned history, mathematics, reading, and, most importantly, respect for one another. Clara often smiled when she watched them play together during recess. She silently thanked the life she had almost rejected. One rainy afternoon, she sat alone at her desk after the children had gone home. A blank journal rested before her. Kai entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her. "What are you writing?" he asked. She smiled. "Our story." He raised an eyebrow. "Our story. So people will know." "Know what?" She looked out the window as raindrops tapped softly against the glass. "That healing doesn't happen all at once." She dipped her pen into the ink. "That trust is earned with patience." She wrote the first sentence carefully. "There was once a frightened woman who believed every hand brought pain, until one man showed her that some hands are meant only to protect." Kai read the words over her shoulder. "They'll think I'm the hero." Clara smiled warmly. "No." She closed the journal for a moment and looked into his eyes. "They'll understand that love wasn't what saved me." He tilted his head. "What did?" "You did." She laughed softly before correcting herself. "No, not by rescuing me from danger." She rested her hand in his. "You saved me by waiting." Kai leaned forward and kissed her gently on the forehead. It was a simple gesture, one filled with the same respect he had shown from the very beginning. Years earlier, she had believed her heart would never recover. In one sense, she had been right. It never returned to the woman she had been before. Instead, it became something stronger, not because the scars disappeared, but because she learned they could exist alongside hope. As evening settled over the valley, Clara closed the journal and extinguished the lamp. Outside, children's laughter echoed through the settlement. Inside, two people from different worlds sat side by side, their hands intertwined. Their story had begun with fear. It had been tested by misunderstanding, prejudice, and painful memories. But it ended with something far greater than either of them had expected. Not a perfect love. A patient one. And sometimes, patient love is the kind that lasts forever.